am Prometheus, and this is a rant and questioning. So we have a magazine that we signed up for. Talks about it's an energy co-op magazine. Talks about the local politics, a bunch of random stuff. Anyway, every now and again, when election season comes around, they ask a bunch of questions to the candidates, how they will respond to the local energy scene. As a co-op, this is obviously pretty important. And there's a opponent by the name of, this guy right here. And he's made several interesting statements that I question as to the feasibility of their implementation. Let's just put it that way. The question asked, granted they had limited words, I will give them that, but let's see how Booker asks and problems potentially with his statement in these areas. What is your vision of the energy future of Kentucky and the nation, and what do you consider to be the federal government's role in that future? That was the question. The answer? From the recent floods in eastern Kentucky to the devastating tornadoes out west, and the decades of environmental harm in Louisville's West End, our most vulnerable communities are bearing the brunt of climate chaos. We must lead the path forward to an energy future that is more sustainable and less destructive to our communities. There cannot be a transition to a sustainable future unless it is led by the communities most affected. I'll get back to that. That means investing in communities left behind by big coal. The federal government must create incentives to invest in these communities directly, reclaim our minelands, and create good-paying union jobs. Let's start with that last one, good-paying union jobs. I like union as much as everybody else, but the problem with unions is that they are hierarchical based. I can say that, as many jobs that are in the airline industry have unions and they are based off of a hierarchy. So unless you have a high turnover rate, you can spend 5-10 years waiting to get that position to move up, because these guys don't move. So as much as I like a union, they are more inclined to developed industries that have a certain number and they don't grow past that. That's just my personal opinion, could be wrong. The communities, the federal government must There cannot be a transition to a sustainable future unless it is led by the communities most affected. Now, I have read quite a bit on global warming and climate chaos and these things. Now, most of the communities that are affected by such issues are usually of the poorer end. Now, he's talking about direct investment. Well, if you directly invest in these communities, there has to be an output. If I invest in Louisville's West End to clean it up, what am I going to get out of it in return? What industry is going to be there? What clean industry is going to be there? Or are we just going to put up a bunch of cafe latte shops? Cafe latte? Are we just going to put up a bunch of latte shops and call that clean? Because I can tell you right now, Starbucks has plenty of plastic. Okay. So that's a question. These communities, sure, they may have been left behind by big coal, but the question is, what can we put there else? And the federal government creating incentivizations to invest in these communities, how much incentivization is it going to take to move into these areas? Because I'm not sure about Louisville's West End, but if it's anything like LA, and it's that neighborhood, then it's going to take a lot to get somebody to move out there. I mean, a lot. So that was one of the statements made. That's another one. So that was one of the statements. I just question what sort of investments can be made in such communities, as they're not exactly what I would consider profitable. Next question. Recent events and global energy market dynamics have dramatically reshaped the markets for and supply chains of coal and natural gas, which are both integral to the reliability and affordable electricity in Kentucky. What, if any, policy changes or regulations do you believe the federal government should create regarding fossil fuels, including coal plant electrical generation. Now, I'd like to mention the direct mention of coal, fossil fuels, and natural gas. Okay? Just want to mention that. The candidate's response. We cannot rely on foreign governments or fragile supply chains to deliver our energy needs. The best approach to achieving long-term energy independence is to invest in clean energy sources here at home. Fossil fuel companies saw the past 2 years as an unprecedented opportunity to price gouge Kentuckians as they reported some of their most profitable years on record. We deserve leaders who will put an end to corporate price gouging so that regular Kentuckians aren't stuck holding the bag. Now, my question is, the best approach to, we cannot rely on foreign governments for fragile supply chains to deliver our energy needs. The best approach to achieving long-term energy independence is to invest in clean energy sources here at home. I just want to say one country, Germany. They were hearkened as some of the biggest investors in green energy. They had some of the largest capacities of green energy on their grid. And last time I checked, since Russia cut them off, they've been having some issues with that grid. So I would almost say Germany sounds like the exact opposite of what we do, because we have less solar and wind than Germany, or clean energy. Actually, I should mention that. He doesn't mention what clean energy he's talking about, just mentioned clean energy sources. I assume he means solar and wind, because that's pretty much the only thing we could use here. Although I'll get back to that in a second as well. We deserve leaders who will put an end to corporate price gouging so that regular Kentuckians aren't stuck holding the bag. Now, I understand that the fossil fuel prices have gone up considerably, but what makes solar and wind any different? They won't price gouge too when they realize that they're the one regulated source of energy that is in vogue at the moment, that they realize that they hold all the electron chips, so to speak. That's just me. Oh, and he didn't mention one thing about the actual regulation of coal, natural gas, or the changing of the supply chains. He just completely ignored it and moved on to clean energy. I just want to mention that. Kentucky. The question. Kentucky's electrical cooperatives are facing tremendous pressure to go carbon neutral, even at the risk of low-cost, reliable energy. If the federal government continues to mandate a carbon neutral target, what would you do to help Kentuckians maintain the low-cost, reliable energy that has incentivized critical industries to locate here? Now, for clarity, Kentucky has large iron, fluorspar, and what's the other? Zinc mines here in Kentucky, and we process quite a bit of it here, along with paper, car manufacturing, and half a dozen other very energy-intensive industries, because we have a large amount of coal here, and coal is absurdly cheap, and so the energy is cheap. Now, what this question basically rests is that Kentucky has faced a lot of pressure to go carbon neutral, in a certain vein as California. All of the energy-intensive industries that were taking up a lot of the grids in California left. They moved to Texas or Arizona, some even to Nevada, because they just couldn't keep up with the prices, and so they just left and found cheaper areas to work. And if Kentucky did that, we would lose hundreds, if not thousands of jobs. I'll keep that in mind for the next question. Oh, this is actually the same question. If we lose the cheap energy, we lose jobs. That's basically what would most likely happen. Booker. Candidate. In order to achieve low-cost, reliable, and clean energy, we need to increase our investment in new technologies. This is not a new concept. Taxpayers have been subsidizing fossil fuel companies for decades, to the tune of $500 billion. Clean and low-cost energy should be just as high a priority. We are closer than ever to achieving that goal, but states like Texas, California, and Iowa have received far more indirect investment than Kentucky. By embracing this transition, we would create hundreds of thousands, not hundreds or thousands, hundreds of thousands of clean energy jobs that could jumpstart our economies. Oh boy, where do we even begin with that pickle? We need to increase our investment in new technologies. Investing in new technologies is all fine and dandy, but the problem is it's new, it's untested, it's unrefined. Just like investing in internal combustion engines back in 1891 with little Otto's, I don't even know how many cylinders it was not the greatest thing. It used a rare energy source, it was kind of finicky, it had problems, nobody knew how to work the thing. The same thing with solar, is that it's a new technology. It's at best 28% efficient, at worst sometimes 8%, and that's just the peak hours. Add a cloud and it gets even worse. And question, what do you mean by invest in new technologies? Are we investing in the construction of these new technologies, the development of these new technologies, the installation of these new technologies? What are we actually investing in? What part of the supply chain are we throwing our chips in? Are we going to try and create a vertical, a horizontal? What kind of future are we actually seeing here? And taxpayers have been subsidizing fossil fuel companies for decades to the tune of $500 billion. $500 billion is a lot of money. An argument to that is that coal, natural gas, and oil produce about 80% of the energy mix. That's about average for most states and fixes most of the United States and all. Clean energy, which I would like to mention, is mostly based off of hydroelectric, which has its own plethora of ecological problems, makes up maybe 15%. Solar and wind just do not make up that much of the energy pie. If you look at it, if you can actually find the energy pie, you will see a tiny little sliver of 0.2 to 1.2%. That is usually what solar and or wind make up at any given time. Now, granted, you can find larger ones, like I think the general capacity of America is 17% at the moment. But the point is that we've also dumped a lot of money into these. We're approaching the same cost as the fossil fuels, and yet it still hasn't made up the gap. We've dumped billions in, and we haven't gotten anywhere close to an equal share of the pie for fossil fuels. That is a bit concerning. Clean energy and low-cost energy should be just as high of a priority. Again, solar and wind, not clean, not cheap to produce, or to really use, or to maintain. Granted, its maintenance is unintensive, if that makes any sense. It's just a royal pain to do it, because you don't want dust on it for some reason. Dust and solar panels just don't mix, don't know why. By embracing this transition, we would create hundreds of thousands of clean new energy jobs. My question is, where is that? Is that in research and development, or is that in manufacturing? Because I can bet you, if he's talking about installing solar panels, it's no different than the road construction. The jobs only exist so long as the road's being built. And it doesn't take a brainiac to install a solar panel and tighten down 4 bolts. That's not going to create high-paying, long-lasting jobs in Kentucky. So my question is he talking about bringing in the development and R&D? Because I can bet you, if we're talking installation, we're going to bring in maybe 1,000 Kentuckians to install, dig, and clear a plot of land, pour some concrete for the pylons, install the solar panels, and then the company who hired it is going to grab somebody from Iowa or California who already has experience on a solar plant and bring them in for the management. He's the one who's going to get paid. And then after that, where are these Kentuckians going to be? Back flipping burgers at McDonald's and Dairy Queen. Also, jumpstart our economies. Economies are not something that can be jump-started. I have time, I have to check. They are something that is either economic or uneconomic. You cannot just simply jump-start a plant by throwing it in the dirt and pouring 50 gallons of water, which would be the amount of water it needs to live, over its lifespan. It needs to be good soil. The economy needs to have the right conditions. Industry will not work here if the conditions aren't right. If the power isn't cheap, if the workers aren't there, if the taxes are too high, if the regulations too strict, all these conditions will cause industry to look elsewhere for a place to set down roots and grow. We call it growing businesses. You can't just start a business anywhere. Especially with all the regulations we have to deal with today. Oy. Now, next question. I have a kind of synopsis to go over. Kentucky's electrical cooperatives work to attract and retain industries and create jobs. Beyond the resources in the federal infrastructure law, what is your plan to help Kentucky encourage further economic development and improve quality of life? Candidate. Kentucky has seen massive investment in clean energy, from the $2 billion electric battery plant in Bowling Green to the $5.8 billion Ford Motors investment in Hardin County. But we must go further. Decades of failed leadership is holding Kentucky back and keeping us at the bottom of nearly every quality of life index. These are systemic issues, and ones that make Kentucky less competitive nationally. In the Senate, I will fight to fully fund our schools, train our workforce, and ensure that Kentuckians have one of the highest quality of life in the country. With federal leadership, we can secure life, freedom, and prosperity for every Kentuckian. I call this vision the Kentucky New Deal. I don't know if you can tell from my voice, but we already have two, both of which had debatable reactions. Let's not go for three. Okay, let's talk about that battery plant. Now, I don't know about you, but what the heck is a battery plant? Is it one of those ginormous capacity plants to hold grid energy for off times during the clean energy lack of operation? I forget what it's called. When it's not on, sun's not shining, wind's not blowing. Which I'd like to mention, Kentucky only has reliable wind in the fall. That's the only time I know of that has wind that consistently spins. And in fact, we're just a few miles above Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which, if I'm not mistaken, was specifically designed because it was the least windy place we knew of in the country. So wind is pretty much out, and we're not exactly what we would call a high solar state. We only have 4 peak hours or something like that. We have a good bit less than what would be considered optimal. But he makes the promise of battery plant. It's not a battery plant. It is a plant to build batteries for electric vehicles, such as those found in Ford Motors and Lincoln Motors, if I remember the news article I read on it correctly. That's a lot of money, and they said roughly 5,000 jobs. Great, wonderful jobs here in Kentucky, building batteries. Those are almost definitely not going to be LiPo. Those are definitely not going to be lead acid. They're probably going to be LiPo, lithium polymer, and half a dozen other elements, or some form of lithium-ion battery. Not lead acid, and probably not NiCad. Good old NiCad. Who doesn't love a heavy metal? Now, I find that a bit ironic, considering in the previous question, we cannot rely on foreign governments or fragile supply chains to deliver our energy needs. The best approach to achieving long-term energy independence is to invest in clean energy sources here at home. Where do we get lithium? Well, last time I checked, we import most of our lithium from Bolivia. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear the term South American government, bastion of stability and order are not what come to mind. And what about cobalt and nickel, which, surprisingly enough, I think make up a bigger portion of the lithium battery, but it's the lithium... Anyway, cobalt and nickel are also important for the production of these batteries. Where are they getting those? Well, they're getting them from African countries. Again, not what I would consider the bastion of stable government. So he's talking about creating jobs based off of foreign supply chains, not based even in the States, but outside, not even in Kentucky, not even in the States, but outside our borders, using supply chains in unstable third world nations, as per usual. And those 5,000 jobs are completely dependent on those elements getting to the plant, because I can bet you they're not actually assembling the batteries there, they're assembling the battery packs there. They're getting in shipments of battery cells and assembling them into battery packs. I can almost bet you that's what they're going to do. And so it all depends on some place out in Arizona or California or Denver. Colorado? Is Denver? Okay, Denver's become its own state. Congratulations, Denver. You've been graduated up. Is going to come from one of those weird places out west with crazy people assembling cells based off of batteries. That doesn't sound like it doesn't sound like a supply chain that's consistent. Unless the world is good. The whole reason why we're having this discussion is because the world's not so good. I will fight to fully fund our schools. That's great. Problem is, the schools in Kentucky suck. And if I'm not mistaken, they are putting out students who can't even read. That's a fairly common thing to find in a high school graduation, is at least one person who can't read. I'm sorry, but that sounds like a complete failure of the school system, not something I should be dumping money into. Improve that, then I'll consider dumping money into you. Please and thank you. Train our workforce. Okay. In what? What industry? In the clean energy industry? Does that mean you're going to start producing more STEM programs? Because I can tell you right now, there are only two real jobs that I can think of in Kentucky that produce high-paying trade skills. That's lineman for the electrical co-ops and aviation maintenance, and that's about it. That's really the most you'll see out of Kentucky. Maybe some doctors from the University of Kentucky. Maybe. We're not producing nuclear physicists, let's just put it that way. Not often. So where are we training this workforce, and who's going to train this workforce? How? And ensure that Kentuckians have the highest quality of life in the country. That's great, but this is the holla. We haven't had running water here until the 1930s, so we're a little behind the times. Granted, we have running water now, mostly. Secure life and freedom and prosperity for every Kentuckian. That sounds nice, but the concern is, he says, with federal leadership we can secure life, freedom, and prosperity. To me, that sounds like a lot of government programs. And the more government programs that you have, the more money you have to spend to pay people to be in those programs, which means the more money you have to spend even being in the program to have people run the program, which means you need more money, which usually comes from taxpayers. And if it doesn't come from taxpayers, it comes from printed money. And if it comes from printed money, it means that inflation goes up, which means that the taxpayers pay it anyway. Because now my $15 an hour can barely keep me alive. Yay! So in the end, what do I have here? We have a guy who hasn't answered any questions. I can't even contact him, which is the reason why I'm doing this video, ranting, is because the only way to contact him is through social media, which is something I do not have. So we have clean energy jobs, but no direct industry or no promises of manufacturing or development. We have simply clean energy industry. The mere concept of clean energy industry isn't pry all away from foreign energy markets, as can be seen in Germany. They are having a jolly good time dealing with the Russians. And federal funding with money we don't have. Kentucky already has a deficit of borrowing money from the government, and all I hear is more spending and not actually solving the problem. What we have in Kentucky are, pardon my phrasing, a bunch of uneducated hicks and coal. So what we need is cheap, stupid simple. We bring in the energy, we bring in the jobs, we get the jobs, and we slowly train them up. That's a... Oh, welding. We have welders here, but every state has welders, I would think. So yeah, that is Booker, Democrat who is running for a Kentucky election. Charles Booker. Yeah. Oh, I didn't mention this, but going back to the good-paying jobs and reclaiming our minelands, I would love to reclaim the minelands too, but for what purpose? Are we just going to turn them into nature preserves? Are we going to require tourism? Are we going to try and turn them back into farmland? How? What are we doing with these reclaimed minelands? What can we do with reclaimed minelands? There has to be a reason to dump the money in, because I run on the quote-unquote Army Corps of Engineers beach reclaimment. If I'm going to bother pumping sand onto a beach, I need to make at least 2.5 times the profit back in the same time before I need to do it again. And guess what? Places like Miami, they can afford that. That's a weird analogy, I know. I had to do geology this semester, so that's where we're at. Sustainable and less destructive to our communities, as is mentioned, towards an energy future. Now, I understand coal is dirty and unpleasant to be around. Stinks. But I also don't like having 45 acres of land bulldozed over hills, mind you. It's not flat land. We're not Nebraska here. Or is it Kansas? We're not the plain states. When we have land here, it's not usually flat. It's hills. And if it is flat, it's near a river, which is not always the case, but sometimes. Less destructive. So you're telling me that I could have had a 45-acre, 4-megawatt plant, give or take, of coal, but I have to have a 120-something acre, 4-megawatt solar panel farm? That doesn't make any sense. Now, obviously, these numbers aren't accurate to any extent. I'm just throwing them out off the top of my head, but they're rough. They're rough estimates, and they get you in the ballpark. Solar is destructive, not to mention the fact that you can't use your solar panel farm for anything else. Granted, you can't use coal for anything else either, but it builds up. Solar builds flat. And did I mention the fact that we have a lot of hills? That means that you have weird angles that need to be calculated and line contours to try and get the absolute maximum energy, which is probably the good thing, that you need to get the absolute maximum energy out, because we do not live in a solar-rich state. And did I mention the fact that we have tornadoes here? A lot of tornadoes. A good chunk of tornadoes. And quote-unquote climate chaos is only getting worse. So you're talking about something that covers a wide area in an area, a geological area that is known for tornadoes. Sure, they don't go very far. It's not like we have E5s hit down every year. But EF5s hit every year, but you're still increasing your chances of damage. A coal plant is a fairly compact thing, and you require a fairly direct hit to screw it up. I don't know. This sounds like something that solar panel engineers would have to get to. Now, I can bet you $1, at the very least, that those solar panel engineers who have to come on here and think about all this and get the regulatory issues signed off are not Kentuckians. Because Kentuckians are coal. That's what we've been, and that's what we know. So, yeah. I call into question this particular representative's campaign promises. Not to mention, you just mentioned the Kentucky New Deal. Could you have not come up with anything more inventive than that? Kentucky New Deal. Stop copying each other. Good grief. Have you ever heard of plagiarism? A New Deal. We have something that way. We have something that what was it called? The Tennessee Valley Authority. They built a dam like 50, 60 miles that way back in the day. That thing still runs to this day. It produces power and all things together is pretty good. That being said, it flooded a lot of areas, which you can't read, which is bad, and it also flooded wooded areas. Guess what happens when wood gets underwater? It decomposes into methane. Yeah, most people don't think about that when you mention hydroelectric, but that's what happens. That being said, it's done wonderfully. It produces power regularly, and all things considered, it's not the worst. That also being said, you can't just dam up random sections of river, especially in Kentucky, because we're also going on a quote-unquote ecological reformation. So if you start blocking off rivers willy-nilly, it's probably going to mess with fish and biota, and some places are going to get really toxic really quick, and you're going to have a marsh, which we already had a lot of and have done quite a bit to clean up, because I remember Kentucky used to have horrible malaria issues. I'm sorry, but I don't want malaria coming back. We have mosquitoes still, but they are so much less bad than around the marshes, because don't. Okay, so yes, I've lost the plot. Thank you for watching. Tell me if you agree or disagree with this particular representative's plan, or his lack thereof of stated plan, or you think it could work, and how it could work. All that goodness. And I'm a booktuber, so here is the recommended kitty video. He's cute. I love you so much. This kitty is the highest level of politician I know. She knows how to get snacks. Yes, I love you. Okay, good. Thank you very much for watching. Have a nice day.